All right, welcome everyone to Eikon. My name's Dan, and I'm so honored to get to talk to you guys today as we kick off this new series, Guardrails. And when I was prepping for this, it reminded me of a moment. In early 2001, I had an opportunity to go to Nepal to work with some refugees in southwestern Nepal. But there was a problem because we flew into Kathmandu, and to get to southwestern Nepal, if you've ever been there, you only really have one of two roads to choose from. And the best route for us happened to, on many places along the journey, look like this. This was the road that we traveled on out to southwestern Nepal to work with these refugees. And I said to myself, listen, I came here to do the work of Jesus, not to meet him. Like, that was not the win when I'm going out there. Like, I want to bring Jesus, not just go see him. Like, this was absolutely terrifying. Anybody afraid of heights? Like, just looking at this, your palms are getting sweaty, right? Like, this was terrifying. And in this moment, I realized how grateful I was for our nation's highway system. Like, I had never blessed God for that in my life until this day. Like, this was absolutely terrifying, but it was scary for a few reasons, actually for lots of reasons. But one of them, you are on the edge of this cliff that you're like going around curves, looking down, seeing like 100 feet down. But then the other thing, as you can tell from this picture, is there are like no guardrails to be seen on this whole place. And it was terrifying because there had been some times that I've driven on high roads on mountains. Like, anybody driven up Pikes Peak before? Anybody made that trip up there? Yeah. You drive up Pikes Peak and sure, it might feel a little sketchy at certain parts as you get up the mountain, but there's guardrails along that road, aren't there? You see, the problem was on this road, there were no guardrails whatsoever. And just like a guardrail is to protect you from going over the edge, we decided this is what we want to kind of talk about. This is the big idea for this series. So we're going to be talking about guardrails. And what a guardrail is a guardrail is really a system designed to keep vehicles from straying into dangerous or off-limits areas. Right? Like, we all know this. We've seen them all the time. Guardrails typically show up in a few different places. Here are some pictures of some guardrails where you might see them. A lot of times you see guardrails on bridges. The reason we have guardrails on bridges are the stakes are pretty high. If you veer off the road on a bridge, you land in the water. And cars typically don't float too well. So you want guardrails there. Another place that you'll see them is in medians, where there's oncoming traffic to protect you, not just from going into the other lane, but also to protect cars from moving into your lane. So that's a place we'll see guardrails. And then also you'll see guardrails along curves when there's a bend in the road, an unexpected place, or a sharp turn from what's been expected that whole time. These are places that we see guardrails as we drive, as we kind of make our way through the world. And what we're talking about today is these guardrails aren't just to be on the roadways, but also are to be implemented in our lives. You see, the two main purposes of guardrails are really to direct and protect. A guardrail exists to direct us and to protect us. See, guardrails exist for our sake. On that road in western Nepal, I was praying, God, it would be awesome if we had some guardrails, because they were there, they would have been there to protect us from what was on the other side of that. And in the same way, we're looking at our lives, and there's some guardrails we should implement into our lives to direct us and to protect us. You see, guardrails are things that can be inconvenient. They can be, but they save us from disasters that would be inconceivable. See, where is a guardrail placed? A guardrail is actually placed in a safe zone. If a guardrail was placed on the other side of the cliff, like sticking out of the side of the cliff, that doesn't help anybody, does it? It's like, well, it's in the danger zone, and so it's not going to get in our way. No, you actually put a guardrail in a place that may be inconvenient. See, if we didn't have any guardrails on our roads, we would actually have a little bit more asphalt to drive on, wouldn't we? We'd have a little bit more room, and it might be nice to go, hey, could we squeeze an extra lane out of this? We got rid of the guardrails. But they exist to protect us from things. And they are on the safety zone, but they protect us from going into the danger zone. See, every single one of us in life, there are moments that in our lives, using this analogy, that we've gone off the road a little bit, that we've got regrets. And I'm saying that what guardrails do is that there are future regrets can many times be avoided if we're willing to impose some guardrails on our life. It may be inconvenient to apply that on your life, but you have to choose. Would you rather have guardrails that maybe are a little bit of an imposition, or would you rather be on the other side of that cliff and the other side of those regrets? Because I think now we can all think back to moments in our lives, can't we? Maybe we were younger, we thought we were invincible, there are now regrets that we have in our life that we wish we could go back and would have implemented some guardrails. But here's the thing about guardrails. Guardrails in our lives are not things that culture really celebrates. Culture does not look at people who institute guardrails in their life and safety measures, and I'm gonna be wise about this, and I know I could do this, but I'm gonna set a guardrail in my life. Culture doesn't look at that and celebrate it, does it? No, culture many times mocks people who set up guardrails in their life. They mock you for making a decision or having a value or a boundary in your life, and you say, I won't do this. Culture likes to mock people that do that. But do you know who culture likes to mock even more than that? People that end up in the ditch, right? Culture loves to mock people that already made the mistake. So the question is, which side would you like to be mocked on? The side for having some guardrails or going over the edge and being mocked for that? You see, what culture says is culture has these other values. See, culture is more content with painted lines. They like suggestions. Here's where the road ends. I'm not gonna stop you from driving off the road. I'm just gonna let you know the road is gonna end right around here. It's just this suggestion, this painted line. Don't tell me what I can do, what I can't do. Don't tell me I'm not allowed to do that. Just give me some painted lines, give me some suggestions of where I should go, but don't stop me from actually doing it. That's what culture wants. What does culture tell our young people about sex? What does culture tell young people about sex? They say things like this. Listen, you just need to wait until you're ready, right? Do you know who invented that line? Definitely not a man. I'll tell you that much. It was not a guy who said, wait until you're ready. Because have you ever met a teenage guy? You know when they're ready? Yesterday. Like always. Yes, right? Like I was born ready, right? Like that clearly, that's the painted line that culture wants to give, but that doesn't help anybody. Or there's another line, how about this? How about, you know what, you need to consolidate your debts. It's this suggestion. Nothing about like changing your spending habits. Nothing about reining things back a little bit. You know what a bunch of little debts look like when they get consolidated? A big debt. Like it's just still debt, right? That doesn't help it, but it's this painted line. Oh, maybe you should consolidate your debts, but you don't have to, it's whatever. Or this one, I love this one. How about this? You know, you just need to listen to your heart. Just listen to what your heart tells you, which I don't even know what that means, first of all. You know what my heart usually tells me? Whatever I want to do, right? Like I'm gonna listen to my heart, which means I'm gonna eat that 5th slice of pizza. That's what my heart tells me is eat more pizza. So like whatever it is, this doesn't help anyone. But this is what culture likes to do. I don't wanna impose on you any guardrails. I don't wanna tell you what you can and can't do. I just, here's some suggestions, some painted lines. You see, we've gotta decide, if you opt for guardrails, you will not be celebrated. But I'm telling you, you'll have fewer regrets. So the question is, which do you want? To have freedom to go wherever you want, including in the ditch? Or do you want to limit the regrets you have later on in life? Do you want to look back at your life with fewer regrets? Because I think every single one of us have moments in our lives that we look back on. So I wish there would have been a guardrail at that turn in the road. When my future took this turn, when I had this opportunity to make a decision, I wish there would have been some guardrails guiding me. See, curves in life, changes in life, when there are big life decisions to be made, that's an important point when we need guardrails. When the stakes really matter, when the decision that you can make has this huge impact on your life, you want guardrails at that time. When it comes to other people intersecting with your life, when it comes to relationships, guardrails are important. You see, in the upcoming weeks, in the future weeks, we're gonna be talking about specific areas of our life that we need guardrails in our lives, whether it's financially or relationally. There's several different places where we need to think through the guardrails that we're setting up in our life. But today I really wanna talk about the why this is important, why we wanna focus on this, why guardrails matter, and really are something to hold on to want in our lives, not to have there begrudgingly. So to do this, I wanna talk about something that culture, again, doesn't really like to talk about. This is a word that I think should be important for those of us who follow Jesus, but a word that the culture doesn't really like to hear. It's a word that's kind of lost favorability in the culture, and it's this word, sin. Sin, so this question of sin. You might wonder why it's important to talk about this. The reason it's important to talk about sin is because Jesus talked about it, and the early church talked about it, and there's a lot of importance as it weighs on our life. Now, here's the thing. If you maybe didn't grow up in church, or maybe you're in this room and you're not even a follower of Jesus, you're not a Christian, as soon as you hear this, there's some defenses that go up. But I want to explain this a little bit. I want to define this so that we can all get kind of on the same page so that you're not assuming one thing and I'm saying another. A popular definition I've heard, maybe you grew up in church, maybe you've heard this before, the definition of sin being what? Missing the mark. Anybody heard that before? That sin is to miss the mark. Which begs the question, what's the mark, right? Like, okay, great, sure. I'm not saying I disagree with that, but it begs all these other questions. Like, what's the mark? Who defines the mark? Why is that the mark? And all these questions, and here's the thing, if you grew up in church and you grew up comfortable with this and talking about this and conversations about this, that definition is no problem for you because you know right away how to answer those questions. Or maybe for you, you're a rule follower. How many of you in this room, like you tend to be, if it's the rule you follow, how many of you are rule followers? You just follow the rules. You're allowed to raise your hand in church so you can follow that rule, right? Yeah, more people actually raise their hand because of that. They're like, I don't know if this is against the rules, right? My wife, she is a consummate rule follower. Now, how many of you guys aren't exactly rule followers? If someone says don't push the button, you're pressing the button, right? How many of you out there, like you kind of push against the system? Yeah, right? And there's different kinds of people. So for some people saying, listen, missing the mark, and this is the mark because God said it and that settles it, the rule followers go, okay. Or maybe the people that grew up in church and understand these things go, okay, I get that. But we got to understand, we've got to have grace for people depending on their starting points. And there might be people that they might go, well, I need to understand why that's sin. Why does the Bible say, why does God say this? And if we look at Jesus, Jesus actually gives us answers for this. He actually, in his life and his teachings, outlines why we need to focus on some things, why we need to not do things, why we need guardrails in our life. And I summed it up like this, and I think the teachings of Jesus would affirm this. And sin is defined, we're going to define it today as anything, any action, inaction, or system that hurts oneself or another. Any action, inaction, or system that hurts oneself or another. So if it's not best for me and it's not best for them, it's sin. See, that's a better way to think about it, the things that hurt us. So as the Bible outlines certain things, it's saying, hey, this is going to hurt you in your life. This is going to hurt someone else. That kind of selfishness creates a system and creates a culture that excludes others. That system is sinful. That's how we're going to define things today is by this. And what's so interesting is we look at this as kind of our baseline is the early church talks a lot about this. In fact, Paul, who wrote most of the New Testament, he was this traveling pastor and he was starting these churches. He would write these letters to churches in different areas. And he'd write them letters to help them figure out how to follow Jesus and what it means to follow him. And he wrote this one letter to a church in Ephesus. And in this, he has his great monologue talking about this idea and how we should live our lives. And it's found in Ephesians 5. I want to take a look at it. Paul says this, be very careful then how you live. Paul's saying, be careful how you live. Now, if you look in the Greek, this original language that this letter was written in was Greek, and this word live has this connotation of be careful how you walk. It has this connotation of walking throughout life, going about your daily life. You see, if you were to come over to my house, I've got a couple of dogs. One of them is kind of large. And if you were to go into my backyard, there's one part of my yard that I would say, be careful then how you walk, right? Watch where you step. In certain places, there are some landmines that you need to be aware of. So be careful where you walk. It's that same connotation that Paul's getting at here. Be careful how you live. Be careful the choices that you make, the places you put your feet. Be careful of those things. And he goes on, he says, not as unwise, but as wise. Not as unwise. And this, I'm telling you, if you grasp this, that what I'm about to tell you is worth the price of admission, especially for those of you that are parents, that are grandparents in the room, memorize this, write this down, tell your kids this, say, I thought of this because I'm so smart, steal it from me. I don't care, because I stole it from someone else that actually wrote a whole book on it, Andy Stanley, and I'm gonna tell you I thought of it because he asked me about it. So anyway, like Andy, or I have always said, I've always said this is the best question ever. Are you ready? This, because what do kids like to ask when it comes down to, can I do this? It's like, well, what's allowed? How far is too far? What can I not do? It's almost like, how close to the line can I get? Have you ever known anyone like that? Have you ever been that kind of person, right? So the better question isn't, is this right? Is this wrong? The best question ever is this. It's in light of my past experience, my current circumstances, and my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing for me to do? See, this is a much better question than, am I allowed to do this? Can I get away with this? Where's the line? How close to the line can I get? The best question ever is in light of my past experiences. Maybe in my past, I've made a lot of these choices. When I've gone down this road, I tend to do this certain thing. So maybe technically it's okay, but is it wise? Nah, based on my past experience, that probably isn't wise. Based on my present circumstances, I'm a leader in this area at work, or I'm doing this thing and I'm trying to make these decisions right now. This is an important time of my life. Can I do this? Oh, maybe, but is it wise? Probably not. I've got this dream. I've always wanted to do this thing. And sure, could I do those things? But based on my future hopes and dreams and desires, is it wise? That's probably not wise. We need to think through, this is the best question. If you can get this, if you can memorize this, what is the wise thing for me to do? This will save you from so much regret. Asking yourself, is this the wise thing? Paul continues. He goes on as he writes. He says this, making the most of every opportunity. Every opportunity. Paul is saying, in a sense, our life is made up of a certain finite number of opportunities. That we've got a limited number of choices and decisions and opportunities in our life. And I think every single one of us would look back on our lives at certain opportunities that have passed us by with a certain amount of regret. I wish I would have done that. I wish I wouldn't have done that. I wish I wouldn't have gone there, seen him, talked to her, text her, whatever it is. Man, I wish I could have that opportunity back. So Paul is saying in that same way, listen, you've got a limited number of choices, so be wise in light of all of that. In light of all of that. And then he says this kind of odd turn of phrase, and he says, because the days are evil. What does he mean, but the days are evil? Is that like, Paul is like one of those guys in New York City with a sign that's like the end is nigh, like there's a devil behind every door. And, what does he mean by like the days are evil? Here's what Paul's getting at. He's saying it's not just you have to think about. The world in which you live, people are making choices in that world. And sometimes those negative choices can affect you. You have to think about this, not just in light of yourself, but in light of that oncoming traffic coming towards you. Listen, there are things that can happen in this world, and we all know this to be true because we've experienced, that can affect us negatively. So in light of that, in light of all of these things, so this is his setup as he goes through and says, be careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. In light of all of that, then he says, therefore, so in light of all of that, therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. Now, here's the thing, when we read this, if you get too comfortable in church and you just read the Bible and you're like, yeah, I understand what the Lord's will is. Sometimes we can glaze past things. If you think about this, I have no clue what the Lord's will is so many times. And we tend to think that it's this decision in our life, that the Lord's will is like this perfect destination. And that's what we try to understand. What is the destination that God has for us? But that's not at all what is implied by thinking about, by talking about the Lord's will. See, as you're maybe in college or maybe in high school and you're trying to figure out what am I supposed to do with my life? This big struggle of what's the Lord? I'm trying to understand the Lord's will. And Paul says it as if you do all those things, then you'll understand. And I don't know about you, but sometimes, man, if I'm looking at a really hard math problem, somebody goes, come on, understand. I go, come on, not helping, right? Like that doesn't do anything for me, just trying harder. What Paul's getting at here, he's saying, listen, you've got to know yourself. The Lord's will is way less about a destination and way more about the journey. The journey of life, that's what he's talking about. He's saying, come on, don't be foolish. Come on, you know yourself. We know ourselves way better than anyone else. And we can justify our actions to ourselves and explain things away. And Paul's saying, listen, don't do that. In light of all of those things, be honest with yourself. Be intellectually honest. See, we need to make choices that are going to help us. We need to set up guardrails and boundaries in our life that are going to keep us from going over the edge. That is the Lord's will, that we don't go over the edge, that we don't make decisions that knock us off track. And we need to understand this concept. There are things that we need to do that keep us from the things we know we ought not to do. And we need to make choices now. See, you need to do now. You know what you need to do now to ensure you do what you ought to do later. See, all of us know, instinctively, we kind of know when we think about this and we get honest with ourselves, we know where those guardrails probably ought to be. We know those things that we need to decide on right now to keep us from making the negative decisions later. It's this idea that we call pre-choice choices. What a pre-choice choice is it's a choice you make now so that you don't have to make that choice later. It's deciding now, I'm not gonna go there with those people. I'm never going to make X decision, so that when you're faced with that, you've already made that choice. You've already drawn that boundary. You've already set up the guardrail. A pre-choice choice is just that. It's a guardrail that you set up in your life. You see, it's this idea that we know this in life, that one thing leads to another, right? We know this. Always, one thing will always lead to another. We know this. When you make this choice, it's going to lead to this. The guardrail is the one thing that keeps you from the other. It's choosing the one thing now to protect you from the other. And you know what Paul goes to in his example? If we were to keep reading in Ephesians 5, the very next thing he does after he sets up all of that, he almost in a sense says, let me give you an example. And he's not saying this as the most important thing or the only thing, or he's just saying, let me show you what I mean. This idea of one thing leads to another. And he starts to talk about drunkenness. And it's not because that's worse than anything else. He's showing, let me show you how one thing leads to another. Because we've probably been in a place, or we know a person that's been in a place that drunkenness has led to another thing, right? And that other thing many times went off the edge. So Paul is saying that drunkenness, that you set the guardrail there to keep you from the other. You see, it's not a rule for rule's sake. It's a rule to protect you. And Paul is saying, let's set this up now. And there are people in our lives that we think, man, if this person had that rule, or had that guardrail rather, if not getting drunk was the guardrail in their life, man, they would be a lot better off. Because the way they live is sometimes they live like getting drunk is actually the goal, not the guardrail, right? Like we probably went to college with people like that, right? That getting drunk was the goal each night. And you see, we can know people like that, and sometimes seeing people like that, it's funny in the moment, right? You kind of laugh at them and you go, oh man, that's Chad. I don't know why I use Chad, because that just sounds like a Chad thing to do to me. But anyway, like I'm sorry if your name's Chad. I was just going for something, and Chad just sounds like that kind of guy, right? Anyway, I feel so bad for all the Chads in the room. But anyway, and we laugh at that moment, and we're like, oh man, there he goes again. There she goes again. And you laugh then. But no one laughs when a woman gets punched. No one laughs when somebody gets raped. Nobody laughs when someone drinks and drives and ends someone else's life and changes lives forever. It's not funny then. See, Paul is saying, listen, there are guardrails that you set up in your life to protect you from that other thing. It's not so that God can be this cosmic killjoy in your life and say, ooh, that looks like a fun piece of road to drive on. Let's set the barrier there. Well, engineers don't do that. God doesn't do that. In fact, guardrails safeguard us from handing over control of our lives to someone or to something else. It's a safeguard to keep us from handing over that control. See, Paul articulates this in another place. In another letter to the church in Corinth, in 1 Corinthians, he says this. He says, I have the right to do anything you say. Someone saying like, oh, we can technically do this, right? Like I can get up to the edge, and Paul's saying, listen, that's not the point, but not everything is beneficial. Sure, you can make that argument. Sure, yeah. I mean, I guess you can get right up to that edge, but is that beneficial? I have the right to do anything. Sure, you can do that, but I will not be mastered by anything. Paul's saying, listen, yes, I could do that. But then I'm going to hand over control to someone or to something else, and I'm not going to do that. You might sit there and you might say, well, Dan, listen, I'm going to be careful. Maybe it's a relational boundary, a relational guardrail. Someone in your life said, man, it might be wise to set that guardrail there. And you say, listen, I'm going to be careful. Maybe it's something when it comes to finances that there should be a guardrail there, and you're like, yeah, but I'm going to be real careful. We use this excuse, this justification of I'm going to be careful. I want you to know guardrails are how you be careful. Do you want to be careful? Then set a guardrail. That's how you do it. And you see, sometimes in the church, many times outside the church, we get this twisted. We talk about these things, we talk about sin in such a way that it offends God. That you making a choice here and now is going to somehow cosmically, magically hurt the creator of everything. And that's why you better not. It's gonna hurt God. Or maybe you were told that sin, it's gonna make God mad at you. That God's this angry God. And you come in and you know what you did last night and you walk through those doors hanging your head because God's mad. That's not how this works. It's out of love that God is saying these things. It's out of love that Jesus is teaching these things. It's out of love that we're saying it'd be wise to set some guardrails. In the same way, I don't tell my kids to not run in the road when cars are driving by because it'll offend me if they don't. Oh my gosh, I can't believe my kids don't listen to me. They don't. No, it has nothing to do with that. I don't want them to die. I don't want them to endanger their lives. It's out of love that I want them to step out of that road. We have to understand that stepping away from what can harm you is actually a step towards the one who loves you. As we say, I'm going to set a guardrail here. Man, is it maybe fine to be right here? Maybe, but I'm going to set a guardrail right there to protect myself. And as I step back, I'm actually stepping towards the one that loves me. Understand, it's out of love that Jesus said these things. It's out of love that Paul is writing these things. It's out of love that God speaks to our hearts. Because listen, we need to understand that this can wreck our lives, but it's bigger than that. It's bigger than just, hey, you're gonna screw up your life if you don't have any guardrails in your life. It's so much bigger. See, in a way, yes, this is about you, but it's not just about you. It's about your kids. It's about your future grandkids. It's about your coworkers. It's about your parents, your brothers, your sisters. Sure, it's about you and protecting and being wise, but no man, no woman is an island. Our lives touch up against so many people. We need to set some guardrails in our life. Be wise. As Paul said, don't be unwise. Listen, know yourself. Use wisdom when you're doing this. Talk to other people. And I really hope you come back over these next few weeks, because this week was just really a primer for this idea. It's really just to kind of lay the foundation, the groundwork. In future weeks, we'll talk about specific areas of our lives, relationally, financially, these different ways that we need to set up guardrails and hopefully begin to ask yourself questions. Based on my past experiences, what's the wise thing? Based on my present circumstances where I find myself today, what would be wise? Based on my future hopes and dreams, what's the wise thing to do here? I hope as we do that, we find that these guardrails in our lives aren't meant to harm us, aren't meant to keep us from fun, but they're actually things that should be set up out of love, understanding that God loves us, and that's why this is important. Because yes, it's about you, but it is not just about you. Amen? Let's pray. God, I thank you so much